time for a wrap up. So today I'm going to be doing my March wrap up, and I'm not going to do a TBR this month, mainly because I don't feel like I can stick to a TBR this month. I have kind of an idea of the books I want to read, and I might show them at the end of this video if I have enough time, but no TBR this month, just gonna wing it. So we're going to get into my March wrap up. So I only read 5 books this month, and I think only 2 of them were novels. Like the other ones were either short stories, poetry, or a true crime nonfiction. So didn't have the best reading month this month. I read so much in the beginning of the month. I was like starting off on such a good foot, and then all of like the coronavirus stuff happened, all of that drama, and so my brain has just been like so not ready to read. But now that it's April, I have felt a little bit better, and I feel like I have a bit of a fresh start, so I'm hoping that I won't have a repeat of like the awful March reading month. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is the only one that I have physically, and it's not even my book, it's actually from the library, and it's The Lady Rogue by Jen Bennett, and I read this book earlier this month, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So this is definitely one of my new like all-time favorite books. I loved it so much. Basically, it's about this girl, and her dad is like this infamous sort of Indiana Jones type character, and he's never really letting her on his missions or on his like quests to find things, and she really wants to go. She thinks that she'd be really good at it, and she kind of wants to set herself apart from her dad. And so when her dad goes missing, she ends up teaming up with his kind of like right-hand man, the guy that she grew up with, and they go and try to find her dad, and it's this big adventure, and I loved it so much. It's really Indiana Jones as a YA book. It's amazing. And I think this is the first Jen Bennett book that I've ever gotten to read, and it's so funny that it's not one of her contemporaries because she's typically a contemporary author, and I'm just like, wow, this book is amazing. I can't believe I've never really heard too many people talk about it. I think I've maybe heard like less than a handful of people talking about this book, and that just blows my mind because it's such a good book and I really loved it. So it's like pretty obvious that I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It has so many elements that I really like. It's a little bit fantastical. It has some like Dracula elements in there. It's set in Romania, and I feel like any book that's set in Romania or is about Dracula or both is like an automatic 5 out of 5 stars. The next novel that I read was Blood Countess by Lana Popovic, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. So I actually read this book as an audiobook, and it wasn't a very long book. It was pretty short, and it was one that I had seen on Hoopla, and I was really interested in it, so I just kind of saved it to my favorites because that's what I do. But then I saw it pop up on my Twitter feed, and I was like, ooh, someone else is reading it, and they didn't seem to like it so much. I now have to read it, obviously, because A, I'm interested in it, and B, I want to see if I don't like it as well. And so I decided to listen to it as an audiobook, and I actually was so surprised. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a super dark and gory fantasy, so I want to put out like a trigger warning for violence, death, torture, stuff like that, because it is really heavy into those topics. Basically, Blood Countess is a historical fiction sort of retelling or reimagining of the Lady Bathory thing that happened a long time ago. Basically, if you don't know who Lady Bathory is, she was a countess in the 16th century, and she was kind of dubbed Countess Dracula because she was said to have liked to bathe in the blood of virgins. I think it's virgins, but just girls in general, and it was kind of like supposed to be an anti-aging regimen, which is so weird and crazy. But this book was so good, and it was so interesting to kind of see that historical context in this sort of like a reimagining. It was really good. I liked it. The ending was probably the weakest part of the book though. That's why I only gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, because if the ending had been so much stronger, it would have been an easy 5 out of 5 stars. Because like I said with The Lady Rogue, if it has anything to do with Dracula or Romania, it's almost always going to be an automatic 5 out of 5 stars. So this one could have been that. It had the potential to be amazing, but then the ending was really weak and just kind of wrapped things up way too quickly and way too easily. The next book I read was actually a 5 out of 5 stars, and it's I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And oh my goodness, this book, it made me cry. It was so scary. It's basically about the Golden State Killer, And Michelle McNamara, before she died, she wrote this book, or wrote most of this book, I believe, because some of the chapters aren't actually like fully written by her. It was mainly just like gathered from a lot of her notes. But basically, Michelle McNamara was really, really obsessed with trying to find out who the Golden State Killer was, and she wrote this book, and it was literally amazing. It was so interesting to read about a serial killer that had actually been in my home city and had actually been like in Santa Barbara and Goleta and just all through California. It was just like weird. It was so weird to read those chapters. It's like, I know that place, I know that, I know this, I know. It's like so weird because it's not fiction, it's real life, and that actually happened, and thank God he was caught. I think like the most emotional part of the book was that Michelle McNamara had like spent so much of her life before she died trying to find the Golden State Killer, trying to, you know, piece all these puzzle pieces together, and the fact that he was caught after she died just kind of feels like, I really hope that she is like getting some sort of satisfaction, like finally this guy was captured, we have some sort of justice now. And I think we owe a lot to Michelle McNamara for really, you know, advocating for this guy to be caught and for these victims to get justice. I think that was a really important book, and I totally recommend it. The audiobook is amazing. It was so well done. And that book just really tugged at my heartstrings because it's just such an amazing, incredible, interesting story of this woman writing this book before this guy's even captured, just like wanting people to care about it. And it's so obvious how much she cares about it. So I really, really liked it. The next thing that I read was Before Her by Jacqueline Woodson, and this is actually a short story from like this Amazon collection. I don't really remember what it's called. I'm looking at my computer just to kind of see if I can figure out what it was called, but basically it's just like a collection of short stories, and I read this one and I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't really personally like it all that much. I think it had some like interesting topics, but of course it was a short story, so it wasn't very long at all. And I didn't really feel like I got a lot out of it. It's a memoir, so I felt like if maybe it had been a bit longer, I would have gotten a little bit more out of it. But from how short the actual memoir was, it felt just kind of like a really short snippet of her life. And it felt like she was trying to fit a lot of things into a really, really small box. So it just got really jumbled and really confusing, and the writing just wasn't all the way there for me. But I think that the like actual subject matter was so interesting. Her life is so interesting. Everything she's gone through is interesting. It's just the writing that didn't really do it for me. And then the last thing that I read was a poetry collection called Counting Descent by Clint Smith. And I gave this, I think, a 4 out of 5 stars. Yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good poetry collection. I'm kind of a bad judge of poetry collections, mainly because I like a lot of poetry. You know, it's really hard to like write a poem that I don't like, especially with modern poetry, because I find it to be a bit more easy to consume than like older poetry, but I really love modern poetry. I think it's so much fun, and I think it's a really great way to just kind of consume literature. So yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was really well done, really well written, and I actually read it as an audiobook, and I'm pretty sure that the author narrated the audiobook. So whenever that happens, that always elevates the poetry collection for me, because I feel like you get so much more out of the poetry when the actual poet is reading it. It has a lot to do with the Black community and Blackness as a concept and as a culture. So if you're looking for a poetry collection that kind of deals with that, that's like the perfect one for you. It was really well done, so well written, and I totally recommend the audiobook. Okay, so that was my entire March wrap up. I will show you guys the April books that I'm planning on reading. I don't know if I'm going to get to them. We'll see, but I'll just kind of give you a quick little shot of those. The first book I want to read is The Lovely War by Julie Berry, and this one I've had on my shelf for quite a while. It's an ARC, and I really, really need to read it ASAP. The next one was on my TBR for March, and I want it to be on my TBR for April. That's Winter Spell by Claire Legrand. I need to read this. It's a Nutcracker retelling, and I'm so intrigued by it. The next one is because I just finished Downton Abbey, and I'm having such a huge Downton Abbey hangover, and that's The Glittering Hour by Iona Gray. And I need to read this because I don't know if I've ever mentioned it before, but this book basically has the same plot as a work in progress that I had been writing like years and years ago about a very like wealthy high society girl, and she falls in love with a painter who's like penniless. And I literally wrote that like years ago, and I never finished it. I think I only wrote like the first 2 chapters maybe, and it's so crazy that like this book is actually a thing now, so I can kind of just read it, which is great. I always love that. And then I'm also thinking I'm going to do a reading vlog for these 2 books, and that's The Starless Sea and The Midnight Lie. And I really want to read these 2 books. I got them very recently, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do a reading vlog for these ones. I definitely want to focus more on reading vlogs during this whole coronavirus thing, mainly because I feel like it's going to be the easiest content to make. I know, I'm so bad, but I'm just like, I've been having such like a creative slump, a reading slump. It's just been bad. But yeah, I think that these 2 books will be really interesting, and I'm so excited because I've heard literally amazing things about this book and amazing things about this one as well. Alright, so we're done with my wrap up for March and also my tentative, very tentative TBR for April. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh,